Now in this video we're going to look at the analysis of qualitative data as well as some a little bit later some ethical issues that come up that are unique to qualitative research. But let's start with the analysis of qualitative data. Qualitative data analysis is much different than quantitative data analysis, which is statistics really. Because the data itself is text or interviews or videos or recorded observations, and the analysis is largely an interpretive process rather than one of tabulation or calculation. So let's look at the steps that are involved. First, you begin with some raw qualitative data, which is interviews or transcripts or audio recordings or written documents. That has to be prepared and organized for analysis. That could involve, for example, taking audio recordings and transcribing them, or it could involve sort of pulling together documents that are relative to the research project. So after the data is prepared and organized, it then needs to be reduced or summarized, and that's usually done through a process of coding, which is sort of the careful reading and categorizing of the meaning or the sentences or the utterances that are in the document through a process of coding, sometimes called content analysis, which we'll look at shortly. And then after the data has been coded or summarized, then of course there's a task, just like there is in quantitative data analysis, of presenting the data. And this can be either in narrative form, quotes, selected quotes, or photographs, or it can be even graphs and tables that summarize the coding of the qualitative data. Now, it's important to point out that a bit unlike quantitative data analysis, there's much more of an integration of the analysis of data along with the gathering of data. Typically in quantitative research, you sort of gather the data first, and then you put it into a database and you analyze it. So gathering data comes first and analysis comes second. But in qualitative research, it's a bit more intertwined and iterative. Let me show you a little diagram from the book that we created that sort of tries to illustrate this process. So in the beginning of a qualitative study, you have obviously some questions and issues to explore. You may begin interviewing people, gathering data. But in the process of gathering the data, you often interpret what you're hearing, and that's a kind of analysis. You interpret what you're hearing, you conduct several interviews and begin to develop themes and issues, and that can actually lead to a refinement of the topic or lead to some new questions, and then you begin doing more interviews and gather more data, and that can lead, again, this cyclical pattern here refers to kind of an iteration of conducting interviews, interpreting those interviews, developing new questions, conducting the interviews, and so on. So this process of starting with some initial questions, gathering data, in the process of gathering the data, analyzing and refining the questions, gathering more data, further refining the questions, and so on, is the kind of iterative process that we had that I referred to earlier of the sort of the integration of analysis and data gathering in qualitative research. So the aim is to try to understand a situation, to understand people, an organization or a community or whatever, and so you're learning as you're doing the interviews, which influences further interviews, and you begin to develop sort of an understanding of the setting or of the behavior that you're looking at. Now, this last arrow here indicates that there is a point at which sometimes you feel like you've heard things before and you've learned enough that you reach a point which sometimes is referred to as saturation. Qualitative researchers will talk about conducting interviews until we reached a point of saturation, meaning you're not learning anything new or much that's new in the interviews, and you've talked to enough people that you feel like you've got an understanding of the situation. So that's sometimes a way to determine how many interviews to collect or how many observations to make. You reach a point of saturation where you feel like you've discovered what you need to discover. So let's now talk a little bit more about, or think a little bit more about this process of coding and content analysis, which is really sort of the crux of qualitative data analysis. By coding, we mean taking a section of text or part of an interview that raises a theme or a topic or refers to an event, and classifying that section of the text as belonging to that theme or that code. So essentially, you're taking a long interview or a long text, and you're looking for parts of the text that illustrate a particular idea or theme or topic, and that's essentially the process of coding. And the set of those themes and topics is referred to as a coding scheme. And the coding scheme may be hierarchical. It could be broad codes, and with underneath those sort of subcategories, and it may be more or less complicated. There can be fairly simple coding schemes, but also much more involved and complicated ones. And the advantage of coding, one of the reasons you want to code an interview or code a document, is that you may want to sort or organize or even count the number of times, let's say, a particular code or idea or theme appears in the series of interviews, let's say, that you've done. So that's the process of coding. Obviously, there's much more to say about it, and there's much more to it. So one of the things we'll talk about is some qualitative analysis software that helps with the coding process, and there's some videos of that, which I won't include as part of this video, but just to encourage you to look at some of these demonstration videos for qualitative analysis software to get a feel for sort of how this process works and what it looks like to code a document or an interview. Another word for this is content analysis. Content analysis is another term that qualitative researchers use to refer to the process of using codes and tags and summaries of a interview or document to analyze its content, to kind of break apart its content and to sort of represent the content of the interview in a more analytical way. Okay, so I mentioned the qualitative analysis software. Probably the most widely used form or software out there is something called NVivo. A lot of researchers use it. It's not the only software. There's, just like in statistical software, there's many others, but NVivo is probably the leading software, and it has a lot of interesting features. It now incorporates videos readily. It incorporates digital audio files. It incorporates websites. It incorporates documents of all kinds. This is a screenshot from the program, and it shows a focus group, and with a transcript over here next to the focus group in the video. And the coding process is essentially kind of sort of highlighting text or what people are saying in the focus group and giving it a code. That's what you see over here on the right-hand side, are the possible codes. The software is really nice because it allows you to sort of readily tag a section of text. It also lets you kind of modify the coding scheme as you're doing the analysis, and anything you coded previously with the same coding scheme. Let's say if you rename a code, for example, it would automatically apply to all your previously coded focus groups or what have you. So again, to get a feel for how this really looks and how it really works, how the analysis of qualitative data appears, and how this software like this helps you with the process, I would encourage you to watch some of the demonstration videos, which are on the web links for the course, or I can tell you where to get them, or you can just Google NVivo, and you'll get to their website and see all their demonstration videos there. Let's see. Before leaving this topic of qualitative data analysis, I just want to make a general point that qualitative data analysis is often very time consuming, especially if interviews are transcribed, and it's a typical mistake that people make in planning a qualitative study, is not recognizing or realizing how much time the analysis is going to take. And so just keep that in mind if you're thinking of using a qualitative method, or if you're going to be involved in planning a qualitative study, or you're going to hire a consultant to do a qualitative study, that the analysis can be quite time consuming. And so it should be carefully planned for, and just recognize that's an element of qualitative data analysis. Okay, so I'm going to conclude now with some ethical issues that are unique to qualitative research. Again, the book covers this in more detail, but there are a few things that are somewhat unique in qualitative research. For example, in presenting qualitative data, it's often hard to disguise the individual identities of people, and one of the things that participants in research are often promised is confidentiality. And yet, when you're using quotes or videos or audio recordings, it's sometimes hard not to reveal people's identity. So that tension between confidentiality and presenting qualitative data is something somewhat unique to qualitative research. Quantitative research is typically numerical data on people. That's somewhat, much easier really to keep anonymous and confidential. In obtaining informed consent that's a principle of ethical research, that people should be informed about the study, and they should give their consent and participate voluntarily. But sometimes that's tricky in qualitative research, because you're observing or participating in a setting, and you're interviewing people in their natural settings, and maybe without a chance to give them advance information about the study. So how to obtain informed consent, or what informed consent means in the context, let's say, of participant observation, for example, is another kind of tricky issue. Sometimes qualitative research uncovers sensitive information. Things can come up partly because of a qualitative researcher's engagement in the setting, and that can produce unique ethical challenges for qualitative researchers, partly because they have more direct and personal involvement with participants and in the settings that they're studying. And then there is the issue of whether qualitative researchers have a unique sort of obligation, or maybe an enhanced obligation, I should say, to work with people to help improve their conditions or empower them. There's some there's often a unique relationship a qualitative researcher has with the people that they're studying, because of their involvement in the setting. And some qualitative researchers feel that gives them a unique kind of ethical responsibility to do something to help the people that are in their studies.